Yeah, exactly.
It's once it's out there, it's
Out there forever. Yep. Okay, so we're still in chapter 14. We're gonna probably finish up today, and then you'll have options to ask me any questions about the case. If you didn't get it, the group thing, and it'll probably be due before next class, and we'll just kind of talk about it at the beginning of next class before we jump into chapter 15. But hopefully we'll get through with chapter 14 today. So we left off on, it's page 7 on your handout, stock dividend. So this is where we had a dividend in kind before, where a company is giving away shares of another company. This is the case where if you own stock, we're going to give you more stock. So the FASB says 25%, generally less than 25%, so 24.9, it's treated as a small stock dividend. All right. So a couple things to note here. Oop. Small stock dividends are recorded at the fair market value of the stock at the time of the award. And that means the board declared. So upon the board declaring stock dividend, record a debit to retained earnings and a credit to dividend payable or stock dividend payable. And what you're recording is you're recording the number of shares rewarded multiplied by the share price. When the stock is paid out, debit stock dividend payable, or if you put it in as dividend payable, and then you credit common stock or par or stated value, and then you'll credit paid in capital common stock, and you'll plug the difference between the stock dividend and common stock. If no par value, all goes to common stock. A couple things to just remember here. Remember to multiply remember of shares outstanding, the percentage of the dividend to get the number of shares. Be included in the dividend. And then make sure to add the additional shares to shares outstanding. And then the last little reminder. Always adjust for treasury shares. So okay. All right, so let's jump into example 5. On January 1, Culliver Corporation had 110,000 shares of $5 par value common stock outstanding. The corporation on June 1st acquired 10,000 shares of stock to be held in treasury. On December 1st, when the market price of the stock was $15, the corporation declared a 15% stock dividend to be issued to the stockholders on record as of December 16th. What was the impact of the 15% stock dividend on the balance of retained earnings? So let's first calculate shares outstanding. So we had 110,000 on January 1. We purchased 10,000 on June 1. So we have 100,000 outstanding. We take the 100,000 and we multiply by 0.15, which is 15%. And so we're going to award 15,000 shares. We're going to take the 15,000 shares and we're going to multiply that times the market value, which they said is 15. And so I get 225,000. So even though this question didn't ask for the entry would be debit retained earnings for 225,000. Common stock dividend payable, something along that lines for 225,000. Again, here, this didn't ask for this, but just to illustrate what happens to the retained earnings. But you can see when you debit retained earnings, it decreases retained earnings by 225,000. Any questions? Now you guys have a practice one to go through. I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes and then we'll go through it. Again, if you get stuck, you can ask me questions, you can talk to each other. This isn't a quiz. I'm not beating up on you. I want you to learn it, so. I will go over it in a minute, but if you have questions, I'm happy to come over. Just remember, I'm mic'd up. I'm hoping this one will work. Otherwise, we might have to move the class to the UC. Apparently, they didn't equip this with speakers to hear people. And so the microphone that they gave me just broadcasts in the room. So I'm trying this one, plug directly into the computer, fingers crossed, it will record. Get some big number. Yeah, when your calculator adds like an E, or puts a little X 33, you're like, what? I'll give you another minute and then we'll knock this off. I'll walk you through it. So the question says, as a result of the dividends declared during the year, so we have a two-part dividend here, right? We declared a 15% stock dividend when it was $30 per share, and then 4 months later declared a 50-cent per share cash dividend. So it's good that they did it this way because it helps us with our calculation, right? So we say, okay, we have 560,000 shares outstanding. And we're going to multiply that by 15% or 0.15. And that's going to be equal to, I have 84,000 shares. Okay. So now I take the 84,000 and I multiply it by 30, which is the share market value per share, sorry, market value per share. And so that is equal to 2,520,000. So that's our first retained earnings. And so the entry not required would be debit retained earnings for 2,520,000. And you would credit common stock dividend payable or something along that line. For 2,520,000. Now, given the answer has to be here, we could just stop and say it's A, right? If you look at your answers. Why not? Well, assuming that's the only answer we can get, right? Because you're not going to have negative dividends, right? So if given our choices, the answer has to be there. It has to be A. But let's go through and talk about now. We have 50 cents per share. So we started out with 560,000. We added 84,000. And so that gives us a number of shares of 644,000, which we're going to multiply by 0.50 because that's our dividend per share. And so that amount is 322,000. Nope. Yeah, that's right. And so again, the entry not required would be debit retained earnings for 322,000. Just keep throwing zeros up there. So, all right, credit. This would be dividend payable because it's in cash. Alrighty then. And so add 322 plus 2520. And that equals your 2,842,000. Any questions? Okay, large dividend, generally 25% or more. And so when accounting for a large dividend, stock dividend, sorry, use the par value of the stock. The FASB doesn't want companies to inflate paid in capital using large stock dividends. And so the debit would be to retained earnings. And you have the number of shares times par or stated value. And then the credit to common stock dividend payable. Now, the question that immediately comes to my mind is, what if it doesn't have a par value? And so I have to do a little bit more investigating on that. It would probably dump it into it, but they would probably not want to allow them to dump in the fair market value. So I'll get back to you on that one because I don't know that answer and I apologize. Okay. Now we're going to jump into example 6. So shares outstanding equals 60,000 shares. Par value, $50 per share. And the stock dividend equals 100%. So 100% of 60,000 equals 60,000 shares. So we're going to debit retained earnings. And again, this entry is not required, but I like thinking in terms of entries. So we have retained earnings, and this is going to be 3 million. And so it's 60,000 times $50 par. To common stock. Payable. And then at payment would be debit common stock payable. And then I credit to common stock for both 3 million. It's great. You'll hear me on the mic pulling a Homer Simpson. Any questions there? So our answer is A. And capital stock is the same thing as common stock. Oh, yep, sorry, C. Stock splits. Okay. There is no entry for a stock split regardless of the direction of the split. So companies can give you more shares than you had, or they can cut the shares down that you had. The market value of the shares should adjust to the ratio of the stock split. And also make sure to adjust the par value of the stock by the stock split too. Shares outstanding, ETC. Okay, a little practice question here. Kind of brings some of it all together. Company had retained earnings of 400,000. I know this is practice, but it's a little complicated, so I'm gonna help you with it. During the year, Flaherty reported net income of 100,000 and sold treasury stock as a gain of 36,000. Declared a cash dividend of 60,000 and declared and issued a small stock dividend of 3,000 shares, $10 par value, when the fair value of the stock was $20 per share. The amount of retained earnings available for dividends at the end of 2021 was, and so start with retained earnings beginning balance, which was 400. And then work from there and think about, okay, what am I adding to that? And what am I deducting from it? And as with accounting questions, there's always a hook in there, right? And again, this is practice, so you can talk to each other, you can ask me questions. Yeah, need me to go back over something, please let me know. Just going to grab some water. Give you guys another minute. We'll go through it. We ready to roll? Excellent. All right. So let's just walk through each of these and we'll talk about it. The first thing we come in contact with after the retained earnings, it says during the year, Flaherty reported net income of 100,000. How does that affect our retained earnings? We're going to increase, right? So we're going to add net income. Remember, if the net income is a loss, what do? We deduct it, correct? So this was 100,000. Then it says sold treasury stock at a gain of 36,000. Does this have any effect on retained earnings? No effect. All right, declared a cash dividend of 60,000. Dividends do what to retained earnings? Reduce it, so less cash dividend of 60,000. And then less stock dividend. We know this one's small, so we're going to take the number of shares, 3,000 times the $20 market value. And that is also 60,000. And so the ending balance in retained earnings is 380,000, if my maths don't lie to me. And then just a reminder, it wasn't requested, but you know how I love entries, so would go debit cash, credit treasury stock, and then credit treasury stock, paid in capital treasury stock. Okay, so these are a couple of formulas that analysts will use to evaluate company performance, and these just come from the end of the chapter, pretty straightforward stuff. And so what is the formula for return on common stockholders' equity? And that's going to be net income minus preferred dividends. And that's going to be divided by average common stockholders' equity. Plus the ending balance of common stockholders' equity divided by 2. And that's how you get the average. Usually that's over a year. If they just give it to you quarterly, then you can only do it quarterly. Payout ratio looks at cash dividends to net income. And then book value per share is common stockholders' equity divided by outstanding shares. I have a couple practice questions. I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to do those. And we are all set. Note on the payout ratio there that I made a mistake on the formula. Cash dividends is paid to common stockholders, and net income you have to subtract out the preferred stock. So it's net income available to common stock. Sorry, that would make it easier for you if I didn't give you bad information. My apologies.
Book value per share.
Right. Okay, so what is the payout ratio? Cash dividends for the year 2021. We have 10,000. And you kind of have to look at it and say, okay, they've got these preferred separate out. So we assume this one's for common stock on it. So we take the 10,000 and we're going to divide it by the net income, 93,000 minus 15,000, which is the preferred dividends. And that's going to be equal to 0.128 or 12.8%. Okay, and then the last one says, what is the book value per share for Lane Corporation for the year ended 2021? And so this is your common stockholders' equity at the end of the year, 1,980,000. And we're going to divide that by the outstanding shares. And in this case, the outstanding shares are 160,000. So you divide that by 160 and you end up with $12.38. Any questions? Okay, so now we're going to work on the group question, the mini cases. If you need a copy of it, let me know. For those of you on the stream, we'll be logging off now. Make sure that you have this submitted. If the date isn't correct on there, I will correct it. And so this will need to be in by Thursday's class time. So 3:30 p.m. All right. See you guys on Thursday on the Zoom, and I will talk to everybody else in a second.